All right, welcome back again. So I'm just going to, again, summarize training pretty quick. We talked about persuasion. Again, as a reminder, this was sort of done as a lecture style, as though, they were students. It's what I use in the classroom. But the idea there is that if the students have the information and you have the information, put it together and you should have a pretty good understanding. So we started out talking about what persuasion is, but actually thinking of when we started. And we made the argument that really it's innate. I mean, people persuade from birth. They start to cry when they want something. They may not know that's what they're doing, but it's this natural sort of defense mechanism. They get a little older and now they can identify what's going on. The little baby here can't really point to, say they're hungry or they're cold. Little guy here in the grocery cart can. Then if you get a little further, a little more advanced, like this young lady with the bike, you might think about the different ways she used some forms of logic to talk her parents or grandparents or whoever into buying that bike. None of these are where we want to be because we want to be a little bit more advanced. When we think about persuasion, we understand we're trying to change either attitudes, beliefs, values, or behaviors. Now, attitudes are the easiest. They're on the outside here, if this sort of cross-section model. If you think about just what people like, dislike, if they, are okay with something or not, do they favor it, do they not? I mean, attitudes are pretty easy to change with speeches. I mean, that's one of the big things we should target. These other things can be a little tougher, specifically beliefs, which are toward the middle, and values, which are in the middle. Those are more our core concepts of good, bad, right, wrong, what's real, what's not. Now, you can change people's beliefs and values with speeches, but it usually takes more than one speech and a very willing sort of audience to make that happen. Behaviors, however, can sort of fit anywhere. You can think of some really extreme behaviors that people may want someone to do, and that would be tough to convince them of in a single speech, like, breaking their values or beliefs. But if somebody is already, let's say, going to a store to get something they need, and you hear about this and say, hey, if I give you money, would you pick something up for me? They'll probably do it. And that's persuasion. It's a behavior shift, but it's super easy to do, minor, minimal, no big impacts. Others, again, a little tougher. So anywhere in between there, you can use words to change behaviors, but the more advanced the behavior, the more difficult. Now, what persuasion is not, just so we can check for this in speeches, it's not coercion or the removal of free choice. So students shouldn't say things like, if you don't stop, smoking cigarettes, you're going to die. Or if you don't start exercising regularly, you're going to die. Those things may have some element of truth, like, you increase your chances of an earlier demise if you do or don't do something. But you can't say if you do or don't do something, you'll die. That's only in very extreme situations. Like if you have a medical doctor telling someone, like if you do drugs again or drink again or, whatever, having one more impact to your head as an athlete, you're going to potentially die. That's a little different, but for us, we want to stay away from it. Same thing with blackmail and extortion. Just to be clear, blackmail is basically saying, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I will release some information about you that would be harmful to your reputation. Extortion is one step further, and it is, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I will hurt you or someone that you care about. I don't think we're going to see either of those in speeches, but it could be sort of maybe construed that way if someone says things like, you can either choose to recycle, or when we run out of resources, don't be surprised if your family doesn't survive, something like that. You don't want them to go that extreme. All right, next up, we talked about the rhetorical triangle, and I know you all are probably somewhat familiar with this. Definitely, I know, Brady, you are, but you've got 3 points on here: the ethos, the logos, maybe if it will catch up. Where did it go? There we go. Logos and pathos. So as you know, ethos is your personal credibility, and this is really based for most of our students on their ability to cite quality sources. The students that we see in the lab are not going to be experts 99.9% of the time on the topic they're discussing. So what they need to do in order to establish that personal credibility isn't talk about the amount of time they've spent researching, but cite quality sources. That way it's not them telling us that something is fact or real or important. It's an expert telling us that. They're just the messenger. Then you've got logos, which is logic, of course, and there's a whole deeper way to look at this that we're not going to get into. What we want to focus on for this is that the plans to fix problems that we see in speeches, that those plans are easy to follow and that one part connects to the next without having to really do any head scratching or brain work to make them fit. They should just fit. That way the audience is more able to be persuaded instead of having to do the persuasion themselves. Last up is pathos, and this is emotion. Unfortunately, this is sort of the top thing that Americans are persuaded by right now. It's all emotional appeals, and people's emotions are easily manipulated. And, folks know this, and so they do that so that they can gain something from it. But, with this, it could be a positive or a negative. We'll look at examples. But before we do that, I just want to point out that Aristotle chose the triangle to represent this, not just because it had 3 points, but because like any triangle, if you take out one piece, one corner, one support, what happens is everything breaks and it just collapses. So the notion that Aristotle came up with was that a good persuader, the word is politician, a good person speaking, is to use all 3 of these in conjunction with each other. That way you're not relying only on your credibility or only on the logical abilities of the audience or only on the emotional interests of the audience. Instead, you're spreading it around. You're sort of hedging your bets in that some people are going to be more influenced by one of these, but it's going to vary wildly which one and by how much. So if you use them all, you sort of increase your chances of success. Now, speaking of ethos, don't forget just to tell your clients to avoid citing things like Wikipedia, obviously, but tell them just to do the listen test. I mean, if it sounds like something that you would say, according to Billy Bob's Smoke Shack, like, do you really want to say that in a speech? I don't think so, unless you're talking about something very unique and niche. Otherwise, stay away from it. What you can tell them to do is to, A, visit the research consultants in the library whose job it is to deal with this. But if they just have quick questions, we can guide them toward academic journal articles, which are the most reliable sources, news agencies, official reports from, organizations, or maybe it could be a government agency, that kind of thing. Do avoid blogs, wikis, and, yes, satire. Some people still don't know that the Onion's not real. Now, if your client asks, why do we have to do the peer review thing? Just the quick version is it's because it's usually right and accurate because so much critique goes into it. Here's the process. People have questions, so they design a study to answer them. They do that study, then they take it to a conference, get feedback on it, make some changes, alterations, and then they submit it to a journal. From there, the journal editor sends it out to a variety of reviewers who are experts in that area of content. Those folks review it and give feedback. They usually rip it apart. And that goes back to the writer, the original author, with directions to revise their work and resubmit it if they want it published. And then you can usually get it published if you make everyone happy. Now, this can take at least minimum like a year to get something published. And so they are usually very good sources. There are exceptions. There's the biggest example being the Andrew Wakefield case, where he published an article as a scientist that said vaccines cause autism, and he faked all his data. Long story short, people couldn't replicate his findings, and so they went and really, started grilling him about it. Like, how did you do that? And he finally admitted he made it up. He lost his job, of course. His PhD was revoked by his granting institution. He can't get his research approved anymore. He's not even in the academy, right? So this guy's just washed up now because he wanted to go on Oprah and get his 15 minutes of fame, but at the cost of what? There are other sources that are not just peer-reviewed journals. Obviously, there's some good ones out there. News is usually pretty good. Now, not all news outlets are created equally. This is a sort of at least one version of what this might look like in terms of breaking down news across 2 sort of planes. First, if you look at this chart from top to bottom, sources at the top are more fact-based, where sources at the bottom are more opinion-based or commentary-based. On the other sort of axis here, left to right, on the left you've got liberal-leaning news, and on the right you've got conservative-leaning news. And of course, the ones at the bottom corners are the ones that you want to avoid completely. Really, if their source is below the green line, it should be scrutinized a little bit and at least considered, partially suspect, just because of what it is. So if you can stay above that line, the green line, go with that with clients. Now, if clients, what's more applicable to us isn't so much the whole like citing it on paper or finding it, it's citing it orally. And so don't forget that the easiest way is just according to, and then you can cite your source. It is possible to move that around if the client doesn't want to sound the same over and over. So you've got it sort of able to be done at the beginning. So you could cite a source and then give the information. You could give the information and then cite the source. Or you could give some information, cite the source, and then give the rest of the information. There's not a wrong way to do it in those three. However, the wrong way to do it is, besides just not doing it, is to wait till the end of like a main point. I've seen this, I don't know, maybe 10 times in as many years, but you'll have people that want to like give the whole first main point, and then at the end they say all that information came from, and then they list off 3 sources. They need to cite as they go. Cite as they go. That's really important. Okay. Next up here, persuasive appeals. We want to think about logical appeals, simply keeping things in a nice, clear order that's clean, easy to follow. We could do syllogisms and, all these different forms of reasoning, but we're not going to get into all that. All we really need to focus on with our clients is that their arguments make sense and that there's no gaping holes that they're missing. Now, for pathos, what we should tell our clients is to use both positive and negative appeals. If you only use one, the audience usually becomes sort of suspicious of you. I mean, if it's only negative, they may feel like you're trying to guilt trip them. Usually, if someone only uses negative appeals like guilt to get someone to do something, it backfires and they're less likely to do it. Similarly, if people only give positive emotional appeals, people will start asking like, yeah, but what's the catch? Like, that's all great and wonderful, but it can't be as, it's never as, if it seems too good to be true, it is kind of thing. So mix those up, give them some positive, give them some negative, but focus there on just thinking about how that audience is going to emotionally respond to the topic. Now, next part of this, I want to talk about fallacies and fallacious arguments. If you're not familiar, fallacies, there's a few different types. We're going to focus on logical fallacies for the most part. But, there's tons of these out there. We're only going to focus on a few because we see them everywhere. Relationships, politics, commercials. Here are the big ones that I want to just draw your attention to for a moment. And the reason why it's twofold, really. One, we need to be on the lookout for these in clients' arguments or in their speeches so that we can identify them and have them removed. We want to make sure that our clients aren't using fallacious arguments because it's weak. They're going to be called out by someone eventually, and then their credibility is shot. The other reason we want to learn about these is just so that we can be aware when we see them outside the lab. I mean, I don't want you all to fall victim to some of these tricky practices. So the first one up is ad hominem, which is basically name calling. It often backfires. People don't like that generally. Now, pre-Donald Trump, this was almost like only a child's thing to do. Now I think we're in a different world, in a different era, and some people like it. Those people also probably have very low intelligence. It's just the way things shake out. So that one is one we want to get rid of. If your client wants to go after someone, that's fine. Like, not a classmate, I mean, but like, if they want to go after Donald Trump or if they want to go after Joe Biden, you can do that, but you don't want to go after them on personal levels and call them names and that sort of thing. Go after the policies and positions. Next up is a causal fallacy. This is when someone makes the argument that A caused B to happen, but it's not made clear, or it's at least misinformed or ill-informed. So the example I go with here is the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which started, I think, in 2003 when I was a junior in college. And 9/11 happened in 2001. I was a sophomore, so there was a little gap there somewhere. But I remember both very well, obviously. And when we went into Iraq, people would ask, like, wait, why are we going to Iraq? I thought it was Afghanistan that got us. People will say, yeah, it was, but 9/11, terrorist is a terrorist. We have to go get them. I mean, it was just this terrible causal fallacy that we needed to go to a unrelated country, not even all that remotely close to the one that we were attacking originally, to do the same job somehow. It was just a false cause, or I'm sorry, a causal fallacy. Bandwagon fallacies basically say that if something is popular, it must be right. So you see the example of sports teams there. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, whose flag you see on the screen, it's Tom Brady's new team, won the Super Bowl last year. But people often will become fans after a team wins the Super Bowl. Then you'll ask them, like, how long have you been a fan? Oh, long time. They got all the brand new gear because they don't have any old gear. So what we want to make sure we do here with clients is let them know you're making the argument that 80% of Americans like something, so it's the right thing to do. You can make the argument that in a democracy, if 80% of the people want something, we should do it because people want it, but it doesn't make it the right thing to do, and that's the difference there. Either or fallacies are basically saying that only two sides, two choices exist, when in reality there's lots of middle ground that gets ignored. So the idea of a continuum is at play here, and that's illustrated down below. But you've got sort of this long blue to red arrow, double arrow. So if you look at an example like pro-life, pro-choice, let's say that the pro-life folks are blue and the pro-choice folks are red. Most of those people who identify as one or the other are neither when it comes to the extreme ends of this continuum. If folks really were on the extremes, pro-lifers would say, nope, it's never okay to have an abortion of any kind for any reason. And the hardcore pro-choicers would say, no, but it's always a woman's right to choose no matter what or when. Most of us would say, you're both crazy. I mean, what about mothers who are going to die if they give birth? P.S. This child's already not going to be born alive. Right? I mean, that makes sense to me that we would make a concession for that, no matter what our, sort of beliefs were or feelings were. Same thing on the other side, pro-choice, yeah, that's great. No, I'm all about some pro-choice. But, if the woman's in labor and she decides, change my mind, today's not a good day, let's nix this. It's probably not going to be all right, And so I think with those, we have exceptions, but all of us do. And we just need to acknowledge those. And that will happen with your students as well. Sometimes it's because they are going to try to force somebody's hand to act or to be persuaded and hope they don't notice that they're doing this. Other times, more often, they don't realize it either. They just do it because that's what they've heard, and they don't understand that they're missing so much. Straw fallacies are next. This used to be called like a straw man fallacy, scarecrow fallacy. But it is basically saying that if you pick a fight with this scarecrow on the screen, you probably will win because the scarecrow won't fight back. And so if you use this fallacy in an argument, what you're doing is presenting the other side's argument, the opposing argument to your own, as weak and easy to defeat. And if it is, then it is. But if it's not, you should give it its due diligence. You should represent it fairly so that you can then show your plan still defeats it. And, a real shitty plan can beat a real, if you've got a really bad plan and you want to, if your opposition has a really bad plan, you represent it fairly, then it is what it is. But if your opposition has a good plan, you should represent that as well. If your plan only beats a really bad plan, it doesn't mean it's a good plan. But if your plan beats a pretty good plan, you've got a great plan. All right, I think next to last one here, red herring fallacies. A red herring, by the way, is a fish. This goes back to medieval Europe when people would break out of prisons and The jailers would release the hounds, and when that would happen, these criminals on the run would try to find a body of water to get in. They would also try to find a fish, and they would rip that fish in half, and on the other side of the water, throw part of it in one direction and part of it in the other direction. The dogs who are coming up behind this escapee is going to smell them, and then it's going to get weak. Their scent will get weak by the water. But on the other side of the water, the scent picks back up. But before they can notice that, they smell the wonderful stank of a rotting fish. And that's going to draw their attention. So it distracts them. A red herring fallacy in an argument is any distraction that people will bring up to try to shift the attention of the audience away from their shortcomings. So, for example, in the election in 2016, when it was Clinton and Trump, anytime Donald Trump's sexual assault allegations or deviancy was brought up, his response was, well, what about Bill? And that gets us to this notion at the bottom there of what about isms, where Hillary really should have said, what about Bill? He's not here running. He's in the audience. I'm on the stage. Why don't you talk to me? But that didn't happen. Last one here is an appeal to misplaced authority. This is any celebrity commercial for the most part. So I use Bieber here as an example, but everyone has done this. Every celebrity that's had a commercial for the most part. So, Bieber is endorsing a product like Proactive here in this example. He doesn't know much about facial cleaners, I imagine. Right? I might be wrong, but I don't think he's read a book. You could stop there, but I don't think he's read a book on that particular topic, much less have the knowledge to really make recommendations. Now, I think celebrity endorsements fall outside of this category. So let's say that it was, I'm making it up here, Eric Clapton, and he was doing a commercial for Fender guitars. And, that's what he plays. It's what he's played since 69, maybe 71, somewhere in there. So, is he an expert on that instrument? Yeah. So that's probably a little different. Now, if it was just any old guitar, that wouldn't really be the same feel. So like Michael Jordan and his shoes, when those first came out, he didn't probably know much about shoes. He probably does now because he's made so much money and learned so much about, everything shoe related. But at first that was just money. You're getting paid. Gatorade, want to be like Mike commercials, any of those. Yeah, they're appeals to misplaced authority. Doesn't mean the product's good or bad. Just means that's not the reason to be in favor of it. All right, so we've got a few fallacies here again that I want you to be on the lookout for, and we see them everywhere, and you'll see them with your speeches too. Next topic was organizational strategies, and we like Monroe's around here, but there are others, and here are some of those. For persuasion, here are the big ones that you might see. So the first one, a cause-effect situation, where you're going to make the case that A caused B to happen. Well, as mentioned before, if you go that route, if your client goes that route, really, really, really scrutinize that causal relationship between those two variables. If not, it's going to end up in a causal fallacy we just talked about. You're going to have these claims that one thing caused something else to happen, when in reality, it either didn't, or there are multiple causes potentially for an effect. And if you only pick one, that's okay. You just need to identify the others briefly and then say why you chose the one you did. Problem solution is like a mini Monroe's, right? You're going to talk about, okay, here's a problem that needs to be solved. Include things like who it's a problem for, how bad the problem is, and then the cure, which will be the plan to solve the problem, and that will have steps. Next one, problem cause solution. This is the same thing, except now you're identifying a person or group of people to assign blame to for the issue that you're seeing. And then the next one, ill blame, cure, cost benefits. That is the same, of course, but now you are including a cost-benefit analysis of your plan. So pros and cons of your plan. By the way, every client's plan should have costs. The benefits should always outweigh the costs, and if they don't, they need a new plan. But definitely make sure that they're noting, hey, there are some costs to this plan, which are this and this. However, there are more benefits, which are, and then they list those off. Comparative advantages may be new to some people, and all that though is a comparison of two plans. So if the topic was on, adding more parking at Grand Valley, and one plan was to assign parking places in the existing lots, and the other plan was to build a parking garage, then you would want to walk us through both plans and then show us pros and cons of each so that we could then choose the best plan, in our opinion. Sorry, time change. Got up too early. The last one here is topical, and this is sort of your traditional run-of-the-mill basic persuasive speech. This is where it would be like, every student at Grand Valley should come to the speech lab. Here's 3 reasons why. The staff is very knowledgeable. It's a free service that's already included in your tuition, and there's not a limit of how many times you can go or something, right? Those are the topical speeches. Now, all those are good. They can work, but we like Monroe's. And of course, you know about this already. I'm not going to go into a ton of details. What I will say is that this is a 5-step sequence. So you've got the first step being the attention step, where you really can use the same things we've always used: statistics, facts, questions, stories, that sort of thing. But we need to grab people's attention early and hard, basically, with Monroe's, because if we don't have their attention, we don't grab them early, we can't persuade them incrementally as we go. So use things like stats or facts, questions, stories, whatever you do though, go back to it at the end, because that's going to make your ring structure. So if it is a statistic as an attention getter, at the closure, revisit that stat. And how should we think about it differently now that we have the information that you gave us? The second step is the need or the problem. You need to talk about what the problem is and why it's a problem, for whom it's a problem, how bad it is, those sorts of things. So be detailed enough so that everyone will agree that there's a problem, not just the people affected by it. So for example, let's say we wanted to talk about rising sea levels. And we say things like, well, that's going to affect polar bears. Okay, nobody here's a polar bear. Okay, well, it's going to affect the water levels on Lake Michigan eventually. It already has. And so that's going to be something that should affect you. Well, I don't own property on Lake Michigan. Well, have you ever gone to the beach? Yeah. Well, that won't be there much longer. So, make it as clear as possible why it's a problem, for who, not just people that live there, but for all of us that go there. And then how bad is it? I don't know. How fast is the water rising? The third step is the cure or the solution, and this is a step-by-step plan. It just needs to be logical and just easy to follow is the key thing. It needs to be realistic. You can't say things like, okay, so in order to eliminate drunk drivers, then we're just going to take all the cars off the road and nobody will ever drive again. It doesn't make much sense. But yeah, whenever you make this plan, think about what has to happen first and then second and then third. So for example, if your whole plan was, we're going to change the law to make this thing illegal or legal, whatever, that's not the plan. I mean, the plan is, okay, we need to educate the public about this, start a petition and get signatures, submit that to a representative of some sort or wherever that goes. We'd have to look it up. Then we can change the law. But it's not just that simple. So have those sufficient details. Visualization is the fourth step, and that is when you really talk about how the world will look different after your plan solves the problem. Focus on the benefits and revisit the need to make sure that your plan actually solved all the problems that you raised in that first main point. The last step here is the call to action. This should be your very first step of your larger plan. It's something that the people in the room in that moment when you're talking can immediately do and start your plan in action. So it could be, send an email to this person. It could be telling them to go to a website and read something. It could be signing a petition and telling them where to do that. It just needs to be very specific and doable for your actual audience. All right, going back real quick to this notion of the need, the cure, and the visualization and how these things work. So The need, of course, is just the problem. The cure is how we're going to fix it, and visualization is what it will look like after. But if we just focus for a moment on visualization and then check that with need. So the first need was we have emissions increases, and that's changing the weather. So what we need to do is reduce emissions so that we can slow the changing of the weather. And then I've got that from here, as you see, the top thing to the top. Let's start over here. Fewer factory auto emissions means slowing down climate change. Good. That's good for this and this and this and that. Slowing down climate change means slowing down its effects. Oh, look at all these effects. Good. We've talked about those. And federal laws are not easily circumvented by states. So in other words, if we did a federal law, then we wouldn't have to worry about states getting around this. Here is the outline that I use in class, and we've got copies of this in the speech lab. But for my students especially, here's how Monroe's will fit in this outline. So the attention step is just the attention getter. They still need the other parts there of the introduction, but start with the attention getter like we always do. Then main point 1 will be the need. Main point 2, the cure. Main point 3, visualization. And then down here, your call to action is the last thing you should say. It doesn't replace the closure, because the closure is what it allows you to use ring structure and go back to whatever you started with. So it doesn't replace it, but it sort of it partners with it, and it gives the audience that immediate action they can take to start the plan in motion. All right. From there, we talked a little bit about an example and why everyone should have this peel and stick wall decal. That was fun. And then we jumped back in and talked about delivery. So let me hit you with this and then we'll be done. But basically, we talked about how immediacy is the ability of a speaker to connect with his or her audience, and it's done through using conversational style, both verbally and non-verbally. Verbally, and really most of this is non-verbal use of the voice, but we'll consider it verbal for right now. Don't forget to let your clients know that they naturally have a conversational style, most of them. And if they do, they should not try to change that too much. They should just use it. And so, people often will give a speech, and suddenly, it's like, I don't know if it's the nerves or the rigidity or what it is, but they get a little bit stiff. And they don't shift their voice and their tone. They need to do that. So these two examples, you just won $1 million. Everything's, it goes up, it's faster. But your dog just got ran over by a car. Everything drops down. Don't lose that in a speech. Personal and personalized stories. Stories are great for persuasion because they give sort of a storytelling element here. We're learning something, we're envisioning something, and now our brain is engaged in ways that allow us to be persuaded. And so for these, if you have an actual story that's yours and you don't mind to share it and it fits, that's best. If you don't, try to find a real story and then say who it's about. That's second best. If you can't do that, make a story up and then don't tell us that it's real though. Don't tell us it's about you or someone you know. You can just give characters names. That's fine. But no matter what you do story-wise, have details, people's names, character descriptions, appearances, things that will help that audience visualize what you're talking about. A couple other things that can help or hinder verbal conversational style, things like appropriate humor. If the topic a speaker is talking about lends itself to humor fairly well, you might have the student consider using it. Now, as important as understanding is if that student is funny. If they're not, I'd stay away from humor. How do they know if they're funny? Ask them. Just say, do you think you're a funny person? Are you a comedic person? And if they take more than 3 seconds to answer, or they say anything other than, oh yeah, they're not funny. And they need to stay away from that here. Last on this, language that you use, the specific words that you choose, your clients choose for their speeches, make sure that it is specific. So instead of saying things like a lot, say that there were 15 or whatever the number is. Or instead of it was, a cool day. Well, it was a crisp autumn day with temperatures in the 40s or something, just so that your audience doesn't have to guess any details. It's just provided for them. They can connect with them and understand them. The other part of the language discussion here is to avoid jargon or field-specific terms when you're talking to a general audience that has a varying level of knowledge. I say fifth grade speaking on here. If you can keep things at a fifth grade level, you'll catch pretty much everybody that listens. And it's not to say that our students or clients are only fifth grade intelligent. It's just saying that in a variety of settings, that's the safe level. That doesn't mean you slow down or talk like, baby talk. It's just not using big words. Now, immediacy happens nonverbally also. We talked about these topics. We went through and looked at these faces and just pointed out how they're so similar across cultures and time. We talked about moving. We're going to go through all of these. Here's some eye contact ideas. So if you have a client who is apprehensive about eye contact, for a lot of people, that's a trigger for their anxiety, is making eye contact with someone else. If you have that student, tell them to look around that room on this orange line here, somewhere close to that, so that they're going right above everyone's head. Now, don't tell them to just look at everyone's hair or the top of everyone's head, because if that's the case and people are stacked from the angle of the speaker, if you look at this person's head, well, now this person's eyes have just locked onto yours. And so you don't want to accidentally do that. But it's best to make at least some eye contact. So another option is just pick a couple people in the room, 2 or 3. You don't even have to tell them if you don't want to. But pick those folks that you can look at and still continue to speak, and then give the speech to them. It will still be eye contact. It's just not with everyone, and that is not the end of the world. The third approach here to eye contact is the ideal, which is looking at everybody. Apparently, except that young lady in the back. I didn't see you back there. I didn't put an arrow on her. Movement is important during a speech because it communicates confidence and keeps attention. I think of this on 3 levels. So if you want to play it sort of on the easy level, you can do the 2-step, which is basically just dividing your room in half and then turning your body at key moments like transitions between main points. That way you give everyone your personal attention, it feels like, because you face them and speak to them. However, tell your clients, make sure you just swivel your neck. There are other people in the room and we need to not make them feel left out. The second thing you could do is a speaker's triangle. And the way this works is as you begin your introduction, the student could stay right in the middle of the triangle as you see it there. And it doesn't matter how the triangle is drawn as long as the speaker can envision it around them as they begin to speak. So you would go through the blue hole there and you would start your introduction. Then when you get through with that, you would move down to any point on that triangle and deliver main point 1. As you go to a transition, slide over to a new position, and a transition again, you go to main point 3, and let's move back to the conclusion. So let's move back to the middle. That's the idea for the speaker's triangle. If you like to do it a little bit more difficult, a little more challenge, you can do what I call the lawyer walk. And that is where you start sort of in the middle and you move to one side. So I'm going to start my introduction. I'm going to go over here. Now I'm going to stay there for a moment and the other end of the corner of the room. And then when the moment is right, I will make my way slowly all the way to the other side of the room, talking the entire time. Then when I finish with that one, I might come back to the middle and do main point 3. For the conclusion, I could come forward, go backwards, go to the point 1 that we see on the screen. It doesn't matter. The big thing is that students have thought about this and that they have an idea of what they're going to do. Best case scenario, they know exactly what they're going to do and they've practiced. Okay, gestures are important again for confidence and attention, but they need to be purposeful. If you've got someone who is not gesturing, try to encourage them to just do it on the easy moments like 1, 2, 3 or small, large, that sort of thing. If you have someone who is gesturing, maybe they're just doing too much and they're just kind of always talking with their hands. Encourage them to be more purposeful. They can use the same amount, but now the words they use will line up with their gestures. And so that is not a bad thing. A game I like to play sometimes is where's the bathroom? So it's basically describing how to get to the nearest restroom without using your hands. And you'll find, I think, that's really tough to do because most people like to just say, yeah, you just go out this door, go around the corner, and it's going to be over on your left. That's it. Next to last here, posture. Basically, don't get stuck. I don't like it when people are too rigid, like they have a stick in the back of their shirt, but also when they're too cool for school and just stay slouched and hunched over the whole time. Neither one of those are good. So just don't get stuck in one or the other. Last thing here is this notion of artifacts or things that or sort of decorate your body. That could be clothes, jewelry, brands, tattoos. You see it there. And if your client has any of those that you notice, you might let them know that while judgment may or may not be appropriate, it will happen. And you don't want them to be doubted or seen as less persuasive because of something that they could hide or remove. Okay, then we went back and we did it again here with Grandma, and we reviewed, and then you missed the great cookout at my house. That's okay, though. We'll do it again soon. We ate. I hope you learned something. If you have questions on this, let me know. And otherwise, I will see you shortly.